The Kutta Sikh is Chelek Tezayin, Kisisa Sikha Aleph. It's a little bit of a longer Sikha with a bunch of details. In other words, we're going to explore the idea of Machzis HaShekel, both from the Nigla perspective as well as from the perspective of Chassidus. Many details will be woven together, and at the end, we have a beautiful tapestry with a much deeper and more comprehensive understanding of the Machzis HaShekel, and a beautiful hero to us and to those Yidden that we are reaching out to be mekadev them to Yiddishkeit. Af in Pasuk Zeh Yitnu Machzis HaShekel. This parsha tells us the mitzvah of Machzis HaShekel. Zeh Yitnu kol over al Apkudim. Machzis HaShekel. Zogin Razal Chazal tell us, and Rashi brings us a Rabbi Pirushi Elatera, and Rashi brings it down as well. Omer Rab Meir K'min Matbeya Shal Eish Hoitzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mitachas Kisi Kvedei. The Eibishter extracted, he withdrew something like a fiery coin, a coin of fire, from under his holy throne. V'hereu leMoshe, and he showed it to Moshe. V'amar le Zeh Yitnu, this is what they shall give. Kozeh, like this, Yitnu, they shall give. The Machzis HaShekel is like this coin. Now, this idea that Moshe needed help to understand certain things, we find this in other places as well. B'deimel hazeh. Similar to this, as the Eibishter hat Moshe gewiesen hat Dugma von der Sache, auf welcher hat ihm angesagt, that Moshe, the Eibishter had to show Moshe an example of something that he was being commanded. Gefindt mit Bakamba and Yana, we find in various different things. Aleph number 1 is Kasha Moshe v'Maisa Menorah. Moshe struggled with understanding the Menorah, how the Menorah to be made. Until the Eibishter showed him a Menorah made of fire. Beis, another example, Niskasha Moshe al Meil de Levana. Moshe struggled to understand the birth of the new moon. And the Eibishter pointed out with his finger to Moshe Rabbeinu the new moon in the sky. And he said, as you see it like this, this is how it shall be sanctified. This shall usher in the new month. Gimel, a third example, by Isser von Shiratzim. When Moshe was being taught the various different shiratzim, insects, reptiles, crawling animals that are tamei, it says v'zelachem atamei, this for you is the tamei. Say Chazal that the Eibishter showed Moshe Rabbeinu the various different shiratzim to know which one is tamei and which kind of tumah. And there are other cases as well, some of which are referred to in the Ha'ara. Is nit move on. So now we have a basic question. By the other things we understand why the Eibishter, God Almighty, had to show Moshe Rabbeinu an example of these things, because they contain various details and complex imagery. The Menorah, for example, had goblets and round ornaments and flower-shaped ornaments. And they all had to be chiseled out from one kikar, one piece of gold. And each of these ornaments, each of these decorations had to be in a specific place of the Menorah. In sein spezieller Form, and in a specific form. Al derech gesagt, bei Meil de Levana gemusst wissen genau, be'eze shir tira tera v'ti yeruyu lekadesh. When it came to the moon, you had to know exactly. Genoi means exactly. What size it is and where it should be positioned. As he says in the parentheses, firstly you have to know for sure that it's the moon, not a piece of a cloud. And they would have to describe how it was positioned in the sky. All the various details that the Gemara mentions when discussing how to interrogate the witnesses who came to say that they saw the Levana. Und dann sehe ich die Schratzim, was nicht alle von sie hatten gewusst, wie sie sehen. So to the Schratzim, where not all of them had Moshe seen up close to know each sheretz, what it looks like, and the differences between them. So up until here we understand each of these things is different, is unique, is original, is complex, and therefore Moshe needs a helping hand to be able to understand what it is. There's no difficulties here to know what it means. And we already find by Eliezer Eved Avram that he used money in this specific, or used something in this specific value. It says that he took, Eliezer took a gold nose ring that weighed a beka. And Rashi says over there, Remez l'shikla Yisrael beka l'golgelis. This beka was a remez to the fact that the Yidden are going to use the shkolim also in the weight of a beka. So we see that this was already had been done before. So Hashem should have just commanded Moshe that they should be using a machzah shekel. What was necessary that the Eibishter had to show Moshe a coin of fire? Now, Tisa is masbir. Was die Gemara dort rechnet mit machzah shekel zwischen den Jahren was das Kasche bei Moshe in the Gemara in Menachos, the Gemara lists the things that Moshe struggled with, the Menorah, Kiddush HaChedesh, and Shiratzim, but doesn't mention machzah shekel. So Teisus asks, why does the Gemara not mention machzah shekel? And answers, you can't say that Moshe was struggling with it. Moshe would have not known anything about it. He would have not known the amount. He would not have known what kind of coin to give. He would have known nothing. If you're talking about something that he knows, he just doesn't understand the details so well, you can say Neskasha Moshe. But Moshe had some knowledge, he just didn't have enough, so he was struggling with it, so the Eibishter showed it to him. But Machzah Shekel says Teisvis, Moshe knew nothing about it. So how does that answer the question? Why would Moshe not know? What is the amount of Machzah Shekel? It's a Machzah Shekel. It's a Beka Lagulgelis. Even if Moshe did not know, Moshe was far removed from Gashmias, he didn't know Tzuras Matbeya, he didn't know what a coin looks like. The Eibishter could have specified it in words. What the size of it is, what the weight of it is, what to give. Even if you're going to tell me that to understand the exact amount of machzah shekel, you have to see a physical, tangible example. Why did it have to be made of fire? Es wollte gewen genoyer zu weisen in machzah shekel. It would have been more exact to show him an actual half shekel. Was bedarf geben a pearl, which would actually had to be given. Shal kesef, made out of silver. As David Rebbe started by visiting the Levana Barakia, but the Shiratzim. Just like when it came to the Levana and the Shiratzim, the Rebbe didn't show him a Levana of fire or Shiratzim insects or creeping animals or reptiles. However you're going to touch it in English, but the Eibishter showed him the actual ones. He didn't show them made out of fire. So, first of all, what did Moshe not understand? If he didn't understand it, tell him. If you have to show it to him, show him the real one, made out of silver. Why does it have to be made out of fire? Now, parenthetically, das was der Eibishter hat ihm bewiesen, am Menorah shel Eish, ist verstandig. Now, by the Menorah, the Eibishter did show him a Menorah of fire. Not like the Levana and the Shiratzim. But the Menorah was actually made of fire. Why? Since no Menorah existed yet. So he had no choice. He had to show. He had to make one, to show it to him. And when the Eibishter does something, he makes that out of fire. But you're talking about a coin that already has a size, already has a physical weight. What do you need? A fire. So that's our second question. Our first question is, what was Moshe struggling with? Our second question is, if Moshe was struggling, why not talk to him? And if you have to show it to him, why not show it to him in real life and not in fire? And now we come to another question. And this is going to be a question that there's another Tosfos, this time in Chulin, that seems to contradict this Tosfos that we just learned in the Menachos. Ich darf verstehen. Tosfos in Chulin for the Shaila. Hanal from Tisa and Menachos. Tisa and Chulin answers this above mentioned question of Tisa and Menachos. Was wird Machzah Shekel nicht gerechnet zusammen mit den anderen Jahren, was Niskasha Moshe? Why Machzah Shekel is not mentioned in the list of things that Moshe struggled with? And Tisa and Chulin says something else. It says Hani af al pi shehereu le niskasha b'hem. Moshe never had a problem with what the Machzah Shekel is. Ela shetama ala davar ma yuchal adam litn kefer nafshe. Moshe wondered, what can a person give that would redeem his soul? It says in the pasuk, we're going to talk about this more in the near future, but it says, "V'nosnu ish kaifer nafshay," a person should give the redemption or the atonement for his soul. So Moshe wondered, how do you atone a soul? Atone for a soul? A coin of fire, and this answered Moshe's question. Seemingly the two answers of Tosfos are contradictory answers. But according to Tisa Menachos, b'machzah shekel is even more than niskasha Moshe. It wasn't just he struggled; he was beyond him. Moshe would have not known anything had Hashem not shown him the matbei shalish. But according to the Tisa and Chulin, Moshe did not have a question about the Machzah Shekel. Moshe would have known the exact amount even without being shown the coin by the Eibishter. And that's a totally separate reason why Hashem had to show him a coin. And that was because Moshe had a different question. So in addition to not understanding the Tisa and Menachos, why Hashem would have to show Moshe matbei shalish, we now have a stira within two Tosfos. Then in one Tosfos is mashma that Moshe was beyond niskasha; he had no idea what to give. And in another Tosfos, it seems that Moshe understood this Machzah Shekel very well. He had a totally different question: how do you give a kaifer nafshe? So which one is it? Did Moshe know what the Machzah Shekel was, or did he not know what the Machzah Shekel was? So we're holding Ois Beis. In Ois Beis, we're going to start with the words V'hektim Levayer. We're starting our answer. But before we can start our answer, we're going to introduce our Rambam, where the Rambam speaks about Machzah Shekel, and we're going to have a question on the Rambam. So we're not yet ready for the biur, for the answer. Wenn wir das verstehen, back to Levayer, was the Rambam sagt about the mitzvah in Machzah Shekel, we'll understand this by first introducing and explaining what the Rambam says. But mitzvah Machzah Shekel, he says like this: Hatzivui, this is the command. Shenis Tavinu, this is in Sefer HaMitzvahs, which we were commanded. Litein Machzah Shekel b'chol shana, to give a half a shekel every year. For who Amra Yis'ala, and this is what the Eibishter said: V'nosnu ish kaifer nafshi, that each man should give the atonement for his soul. V'omar, and the pasuk also says Zeh Yitnu. So the Rambam brings the mitzvah of Machzah Shekel and brings two psukim to support it. Why does the Rambam have to bring two psukim, and why does he not suffice with the pasuk Zayitnu? Ubifrat, as the tzivui of Nesinas Machzah Shekel she'davke in the pasuk Zayitnu kol ha'ever l'apkud Machzah Shekel, especially since the actual command, the actual mitzvah to bring a half a shekel is in the pasuk of Zayitnu, which continues Zayitnu kol ha'ever l'apkudim Machzah Shekel. Dakagin, on the other hand, in pasuk v'nosnu ish kaifer nafshay v'niter mont wegen dem etz mitzvah von the sinas Machzah Shekel. In the pasuk that a person should give the atonement for his soul, the Machzah Shekel does not get mentioned, nor As Oib, Tisa, Reis Bnei Yisrael, it's just that if you will count the heads of the Yidden, is v'nosnu ha'kefer nafshe, they should give a atonement for their soul. Kedei as le'yeh negef, if kedei some, that there should not be a magefa, a epidemic, a plague, when they are being counted. Later, the Chacham explained to us that what you give for a kefer nafshe is a machzah shekel, but the pasuk doesn't mention it. So why does the Rambam mention two separate psukim, especially one that doesn't even say machzah shekel explicitly in the pasuk? So this is really our fourth question. Question one is, what was Moshe's question? Question two was on the Tisa and Menachos. Why can't the Eibishter answer the question b'dibur, or at least with a real coin and not a coin of fire? Question three was the stira in the two Teisvisim, that one Teisvis in Menachos implies that Moshe knew very little about the Machzah Shekel, and Teisvis in Chulin implies that Moshe knew exactly about the Machzah Shekel. He just didn't know how to do Kefer Nafshe. And now our fourth question is on the Rambam, why the Rambam mentions two psukim. Is there bir bazeh? So Eis Gimel is going to begin the explanation. What we're going to do is we're going to explore the mitzvah of Machzas HaShekel, how to do it properly, and what the various requirements represent. In the mitzvah von Netzinas Machzas HaShekel zijn voran zwei dinim. There are two dinim, there are two laws, two halachic requirements when it comes to Machzas HaShekel. Aleph, number one, as Dav Zayin an ein molek in a sin, it has to be given in one shot. You can't give it in installments. Today, one installment, tomorrow another installment. It has to be given in one shot. You have to give at one time. But it doesn't yet say that how you give it. I might think that you can give it, let's say if it's $50, and you can give 5 dimes. So Beis, the second detail, the second requirement is medav geben amatbeya for the machzah shekel kesef. It has to be a coin that is a half a shekel of silver. Upshita, and certainly nitkin shava kesef in batref for the machzah shekel, and certainly not a something that a piece of silver or something of silver that is of the value of a half shekel. So number one, it has to be given in one time. You can't give it in installments. Number two, it has to be one coin and not an accumulation of a number of coins. Certainly not a non-coin that carries the value of a half a shekel. It has to be a coin that is a half a shekel. Now, now, although later in the Sikha we're going to talk about kapara again, but the next little bit, until the end of Eis Gimel, we're going to sort of go away from the flow of the Sikha, and we're going to discuss the idea that Machzah Shekel is a kapara, and various different forms of kapara, and that's why it has to be given in one shot, and you can't give it in installments. So, before we continue to understand how the Rambam why the Rambam has two psukim and how this connects to our Teisvisin, we're going to discuss this idea of the fact that when you give Machzah Shekel, it has to be given in one shot, meaning to say in one time, not in installments, and why. The fact that the Rambam says here that you have to give it in one time, we didn't yet quote the Rambam. We will quote the Rambam later where he says, "Bepamachas." I don't remember exactly. I don't have the sources in front of me. Okay, we'll get to it. But the Rambam says that it has to be given in one time. Is Masber the Rogachover. The Rogachover explains their tam, the reason why it has to be given in one time, as the Nesinus Machzah Shekel at Adin from a korban. That the Machzah Shekel has the same din, the same idea as a korban, when it says ageder from kapara, and it is in the same category as an atonement. Un by kapara helfnit kinesinu lachatzoin. When it comes to kapara, you cannot give a half gift. And he brings here a proof in the Gemara Zok B'Nagia Gezel Ager. The Gemara talks about Gezel Ager. If somebody stole from a ger, you have a mitzvah to return it. You have to return whoever you stole from, you have to return. Problem is that if you stole from a yid who was born a yid, then even if the yid dies, you can always find a relative, a brother, a son, a brother, an uncle, a cousin, a second cousin. But if you stole from a ger, the halacha is that a ger doesn't have any kroivim, any relatives from before he was nisgayah, from before he became a ger. So if let's say he didn't marry and he didn't have kids, and then he died, so who do you give it back to? So the halacha is that you have to give it back to a kohen. So the Gemara says, "Echzirahu tzum kohen," that if you did give it back to the kohen, but chatzayin, only part of the thing you stole, and then the next day you want to give it back, you want to give it back more leyotza. You were not yotza, the mitzvah of giving it back. What my time? Why? Asham karya rachmana, because the Torah refers to this giving back the thing you stole to a kohen. It refers to it as an asham, as a guilt offering, as a korban that you're giving to be mechaper on the avera that you did, and an asham can't be given lachatzayin. So from this we see that a kapara cannot be done, lachatzayin cannot be done in a partial gift, and therefore since machzah shekel is like a korban and is a kapara, therefore it cannot be given in installments. Now, since we're on this topic that the machzah shekel is a kapara, we're going to continue on this topic and explore this idea of kapara. In them, as das is an inyan for korban the kapara, can man learn of tzvei. This idea that machzah shekel is a korban and kapara, we can see it in two ways. Aleph, der geder a kapara for machzah shekel, was steht in them, was der mitwer gekauft die korban sibur meshach hashana. Welches ein le kapara? That the fact that the machzah shekel is considered a kapara is because it consists it's made up of the fact that through the machzah shekel we're going to be buying karbonis, tzibur, the communal sacrifices for the duration of the year, and those sacrifices were for the purpose of kapara. So the machzah shekel is a means to an end. And since ultimately the end is kapara, therefore also the machzah shekel is considered a kapara. Beis, another way of looking at it, the etzem nesina from machzah shekel is an inyan from kapara korban yochid. The very giving of the machzah shekel, regardless of what it's going to be used for, is considered a kapara, like a korban yochid. Like the individual who gives the half shekel is giving a korban for himself, regardless of what's going to be done with it, and that's why it's a kapara. So there's two ways of looking at it. V'yesh leimar. And now to take this a little bit deeper, we can add a dozen of machlekes to Rashi Yonamba. That why the machzah shekel is a kapara. If it's a kapara because it leads to the purchase of karbanos tzibur, which are kapara, or inherently it is a kapara like a korban yachid, is actually a machlekes of Rashi and Rambam. Rashi is mefarish v'aleisa truma nemer lechaper al nafshei seichem. Rashi says that truma, the machzah shekel, it says lechaper al nafshei seichem, to atone for your soul. Shehakorbonis lekaporeim boim, that the karbonis are coming to atone for our sins. As by that, in other words, Rashi is saying, as by the truma for machzah shekel state lechaper al nafshei seichem loshen Rabbi. To say that kapara and sibur. That it's being that it says it in the plural, that it's something that is being mechaper al nafshe seichem on the community, on the collective people. Because the machzah shekel is going to be used for their karbonis, v'zeirin is kapara, and the purpose of karbonis is kapara. So Rashi says pretty clearly that it says lechaper al nafshe seichem lashon rabim, because it's referring to the karbonis tzibur, which are the kapara. So we see that the reason why machzah shekel is the kapara is because it's being used for karbonis. The Rambam The Rambam doesn't learn it from the Chaper al Nafshei Seichem. He uses it from the words Kaifer Nafshei. His soul. Which is being written not in the plural, but in the single tense. Es neit nit the kapara from karbonis tzibur, nor as dos hot dem din korban bifnei atzmei, the nesina gufa is a geder kapara. So according to the Rambam, it seems that the machzah shekel itself is a korban, and therefore goes into the category of a kapara. V'yesh leimar. So we're still on this. We veered off a little bit from the flow of the sikha, and we're still on this idea of kapara. So let's just remember where we're at. We introduced that there's two ideas in machzah shekel. Number one, it has to be given in one time. Number two, it has to be given in one coin. The fact that it has to be given in one time, we explained according to the Rogatchover, is because it's a kapara. In kapara, we said there's two categories. There's two ways of looking at it. Either it's a kapara because with it we buy karbanis tzibur, or it's the very giving of itself is the kapara, like a karban yachid. We then said that these two approaches, Machlekes Rashi and Rambam, according to Rashi, lechaper al nafshei seichem, the idea is the tzibur here, because it's about the karbanis tzibur. According to the Rambam, he says v'nosnu yiskoifer nafshe, uses the pasuk, which is a lashon yachid, because he sees it as a karban yachid. Now let's take this abisa latifik. V'yesh leimar, adas is their tam of nochachilik zwischen Rashi and Rambam. Now we've created a machlekes Rashi and Rambam. This will now help us understand another aspect, another differentiation between Rashi and Rambam. Ledas Rashi darf me mechaven sein b'shas der nesine from machzah shekel as megitos to lieb the karbanos tzibur. According to Rashi, a person has to have in mind that when he's giving it for the karbanos tzibur. This is referred to in a Rashi in the Ramaschal, the Rabbis, and Menachos Nun Beis, where over there the Rashi says, he didn't have kavanah for it. Nevertheless, the pasuk includes it. From the fact that Rashi says that he didn't have kavanah implies that regularly a person should have kavanah for the karbanos tzibur. Obviously, because Rashi holds that the whole purpose, the whole reason that the machzah shekel is a kapara is because of the karbanos tzibur that are coming from it. So therefore, when you're giving it, you have to have in mind that you're going to use it for karbanos tzibur, or it's going to be used for karbanos tzibur. For Rambam, it is mashma das sabazunderinin. From Rambam, it is implied that it's actually two separate things. The fact that that the person is giving it, and the fact that it's going to ultimately be used for karbanos tzibur, is two different things. How do we see this? Number one, we says muchach von dem was in ersten Perek in Hilchos Shkalim. Retter blois wegen der Mitzvah und dem Öfen von der Sinnes machzah shekel. In the first Perek of Hilchos Shkalim, in other words, the previous quote from the Rambam was from Sefer HaMitzvahs. Now we're looking at the Rambam in Mishnah Torah in Hilchos Shkalim, and over there he mentions the mitzvah of machzah shekel and how it must be done. And sagt nicht, als wie bald man darf makriv sein karbonis tzibur mit Truma chadasha. The riber is amit esem in atera litten kol ish mi Yisrael machzah shekel b'chol shana v'shana. And he doesn't say that because you have to have new monies coming in, therefore you have to do machzah shekel each year. Unochmer, der macht ganze nicht, als man kauft mit die machzah shekel karbonis tzibur. In this first perek of Shkalim, not only does he focus on the actual giving of the shkalim, he doesn't mention that we're going to that we're going to buy karbanos tzibur from this. And then if you look further in Perek Daled of Hilchos Shkalim, when he is about to introduce the fact that the machzah shekel is going to be used to purchase the karbanos tzibur, he starts it as if it's an entirely different topic. And what does he say? Trumas alishka mayasaba. Trumas alishka is the coffers of hektish that were supported by the machzah shekel. So he says, what do I do with Trumas alishka? I mean, you were just talking about machzah shekel for 3 parakim. Why do you all of a sudden mayasaba? Trumas alishka mayasaba. And he answers, you buy the tmidim, the daily carbon tamids, and the carbon musaf, and all the karbanos tzibur. And he seems to introduce it as a totally new detail that was irrelevant until now. Das heißt, dass in dem Etzem des Sinne von machzah shekel is nicht negeya, dass es lieb karbanos tzibur. comes out that when you're giving the machzah shekel is not relevant that it is for the kabbanas tzibur. Notice this is a din, korban v'kapora b'fnei atzmei. This is a separate din. Und das was lepeil keifen the kabbanas tzibur von terumas alishka machzah shekel. And the fact that ultimately we will be buying kabbanas tzibur with it is as a bazun din for sich. It's a separate idea and not related to the actual giving of the machzah shekel. So not only does Rashi and Rambam argue on why the machzah shekel is a kapara, but it actually has a relevance that according to Rashi you have to have in mind the karbanas tzibur, and according to the Rambam you don't. They seem to be two totally different things. Okay. So now let's go back to what we were talking about in the beginning of Oz Beis, where we introduced the fact that there's two inyanim in machzah shekel: one that it has to be given in one time, and two that it has to be given in one coin. And now we're going to use that to explain to us why the Rambam uses two psukim. Oz Dalet. Pisa is moving their time. Was the Rambam bringt in Sefer HaMitzvahs beide psukim anal. Now we understand the reason why in Sefer HaMitzvahs the Rambam brings both psukim. Von jeder von sie lernt man aber besonders Geder Mitzvah von der Sinnes machzah shekel, because in each of the psukim we are learning another element within the mitzvah of giving machzah shekel. Von benos nicht kefer nafshe lernt up as the Sinnes machzah shekel and in von kapara al derech via korban. From benos nicht kefer nafshe we learn that giving a machzah shekel is the union of kapara, an idea of atonement, just like a korban, and therefore it has to be given in one time. Von Zayitnu, from the other pasuk, because Zayitnu was their lashon zeh beweist of an sinne von ein zach zeh this. It shows that you're giving one item. Megita, we learn from that Megita nit als haschum v'tziru von sen bazun deregeda. You don't give it as a cumulative gift of 10 separate geda. Ubemela hat an arzu sagen as man ken ze euch geben nit alle mit amol, and then one might think that you can give it in different installments. There als ein machzah shekel, it has to be given as 1/2 shekel. Belashna ragachavi ashir ha'atzmi nit ken shir mitztarif. It has to. It's a core measurement, not a cumulative measurement. In other words, when you say 1/2 shekel, it's one item, it's one core item. It's not cumulative of a number of different if it was in U.S. currency, I would say 5 dimes. In the currency of the shekel HaKodesh, it would be 10 geda. So the Rambam is telling us two different psukim to tell us two different things. From the pasuk, koifer nafshay, it's a korban, and therefore it has to be given in one time. From the pasuk, zayitnu, it seems like it's one thing, it has to be given in one coin. So from this there comes out these two dinim. In other words, he's going to say the same thing, but in other asyus. One is relevant to the individual person doing the mitzvah, and another din in the object of the machzah shekel. From the they should give. Each person should give the atonement for his soul. We know the din in the person as a darf is given that he has to give it in one shot and not in installments, not in parts. This should be given, the thing itself should be given. So we learn something about the object of the machzah shekel as a chiyuv is zayitnu. The mitzius from the machzah shekel, that the chiyuv is they should give the entity of a machzah shekel, a madbeya, in other words, not a money that accumulates to machzah shekel, but something that is actually a machzah shekel. Unit kesef le'tnishiru mishkov machzah shekel. It has to be a coin that is a machzah shekel, and not money that it weighs or accumulates to a 1/2 shekel. Very quickly in the brackets. This actually is specified and emphasized in the words of the Rambam, where he says in the end of the Rambam, in the end of the halacha, he says, all as one, in one time. So he's focusing on both nekudas, that it has to be given as one thing, as one coin, and it has to be given in one time. even though technically once it says kule ka'achas, then obviously bepamachas. It's only if you say bepamachas first that you might think it's bepamachas, but not kule ka'achas. But nevertheless, since there's two details, the Rambam alludes to both of them by saying, he emphasizes both of them by saying kule ka'achas and bepamachas. So far, we've answered the question why the Rambam uses two psukim. The Rambam uses two psukim because since there's two aspects, two requirements within Machzah Shekel, and the two psukim represent those two different aspects. Now, based on what we said over here, specifically, the detail that the Zayitnu is the cheftze of the mitzvah that has to be done as a one mitzias, as one entity, a matbeya, a coin of half shekel. Now we'll understand how the Zayitnu leads us to the matbeya shalish. Please, if we understand what the purus from Zayitnu is, kimi matbeya shalish, now we understand why that based on the fact that we were just learned that the Zayitnu is teaching me that it has to be one cheftze, one matbeya of a machzah shekel. Now we can understand how we get from Zayitnu to this pirush that the Eibishter withdrew a matbeya shel eish, a coin of fire, from under his holy throne. And showed it to Moshe. Zayitnu, because Zayitnu, he said, this is what they shall give. Und es move on der Tam, was der Eibishter hat ihm bewiesen, darf kein matbeya shel eish. And it also can answer to us the reason why the Eibishter had to show him specifically a coin of fire. And he says as follows: the difference between, we know that the Eibishter created the world with four elements: wind, water, dirt, and fire. The difference between fire and the other elements in creation, the other materials of creation, is the other materials such as wind, water, and dirt. Their kamos are measured by their quantity. How much space they take up, or in value. They're most in gasmistik and shetach. You measure them by their physical space. If they take up 2 feet, 3 feet, an acre, or in kamos hashavis ve'erach, or their value, how much they cost. Even in wind is measured by speed, miles per hour. In other words, you're measuring how fast the wind is moving, which is being measured in based on space, based on speed and space, time and space. Eish wird nicht gemessen mit der Tfisas. Fire is not measured by how much space it takes. Und ist nicht mugbel in a bestimmten Shetach im Makom, and it's not limited to a specific space. Die Metzius von Eish ist mehr an Echos dicke. Fire is more seen in its quality than its quantity. Even a small little bit of fire could spread and make a huge fire. So other elements of creation, other materials of creation are measured quantitatively. Fire is measured qualitatively. Wenn der Eibishter wollte ihm bewiesen Machzah Shekel Kesef, if the Eibishter had shown Moshe Rabbeinu a half a shekel made out of silver, not fire, wollte noch alt nicht gewinn klar, was der Geder am Mitzvah is und was he davon geben. It wouldn't have been clear to Moshe what are the parameters of the mitzvah and what do the Yidden have to submit. Sie ist angesagt geworden und es ist genug die Shavius v'chulu von a Machzah Shekel Kesef. Is it enough that a person should give the value of a half a shekel? And because of that, you can give whatever you want. Abidas is vert, a machzah shekel, as long as it has the value of a half shekel. Or there has to be money according to the value, to the weight of a machzah shekel. Or it has to be specifically a coin, which is a machzah shekel kesef. In other words, if the Eibishter showed Moshe, says this is a silver coin, because it still doesn't tell me. Are you telling me that it has to be a coin? Are you telling me that it has to be a machzah shekel? Are you telling me that it has to be silver? Or maybe I can give something that's of value that'll match a half a shekel kesef. Maybe I can give a bunch of coins that'll add up to a half a shekel. Und der Rebbe hat ihn bewiesen, Kimin Matbea Shel Eish, was Mishkala is Machza Shekel, and therefore the Eibishter showed Moshe Rabbeinu a coin of fire, as the mitzvah is niti kamos, because the mitzvah is not measured quantitatively, the shavyus, or the Rafilu Kesef B'Mishkol for the Machza Shekel. We're not talking about value, we're not talking about money that weighs a half a shekel, nor dizach gufa. We're showing you fire, something that is beyond weight, something that is beyond quantity. The thing itself has to be given. The mitzias from the matbeya machza shekel will have to be an actual entity of a half shekel coin. Das heißt, nicht der Geder mitzvah is given a mishkol kesef in erech for machzas shekel. The parameters of the mitzvah are not that you have to give the weight of silver that add up to a machzah shekel. Ulachala yeser, there's a tnight study as the kesef that's on betzuras matbeya, and there's a side thing that it's best if you give it in the shape of a coin. Nor dos is the geder mitzvah. The structure, the parameters of the mitzvah is ze yitnu geben di matbeya, to give specifically this coin machzah shekel. And this is expressed specifically in a coin of fire. Because fire, like we said before, is not measured by weight or value. Nor is the etzem mitzias from Eish. It's just the very definition, is the very thing that it's fire. Und es ist doch verstandig, als matbeya shalish mamish kemen it geben. Obviously, you can't give a coin of fire; it doesn't exist. So when it says zayitnu, it means find what is unique about the coin of fire, as it is reflected in a silver coin. What is unique about the coin of fire? The fact that it is not looking at weight or value. We're looking at the actual coin itself, at the eichus, and you do the eichus in kesef, in silver. So now we've answered why the Rambam uses two psukim. We've also answered why the connection between Zayitnu and the Matbeya Shalesh. That once we understand that Zayitnu is that it has to be Dafka Matbeya Shalesh, now we understand why the Eibishter had to show it to him in the Matbeya Shalesh. Now, our initial question was, why wasn't it enough to show Moshe Rabbeinu, to tell him, to give him to do machzah shekel, or to show him a matbeya shel kesef? The answer is because Moshe would have still been confused, not knowing these details that we just introduced. That it has to be actually a matbeya of a machzah shekel. Now we're going to go back to the Teisvis in Chulin and the Teisvis in Menachos. Al Pizeh, wenn wir verstehen die zwei Tirutzim von Teisvis, Hanal Seif Aleph, als sie seien nicht mechuluk zwischen sich, nur sie seien behessem zu die zwei Gedorim Hanal in the Sinnes Machzah Shekel. Once we introduced that the Machzah Shekel is made up of two requirements, then the two answers of Teisvis are addressing the two details within Machzah Shekel. In Menachos sagt Teisvis, Mishum delay have a yod the ezem atbeya yaviu, mishum inyanim lo yamareu. In the Teisvis in Menachos, Teisvis says that Moshe would not have known what to give, what coin to give, if had the Eibishter not shown it to him. When the Eibishter weist ihm nit am atbeya shleish, volt Moshe nit gewusst, nit nor niskasha. Not only would have struggled with it, but he would have not known anything about it. Dem din as a darf sein zayitnu. He wouldn't have known the din that it should be this. The tnai in chefze from the matbeya kanal barucher, the condition within the chefze that it has to be specifically a matbeya of machzah shekel. So in the Tisa Menachos, he's addressing this detail that Moshe needed to know that it has to be a matbeya of machzah shekel, and therefore he says otherwise Moshe would have not known anything. And dafke matbeya shel eish explained to Moshe that it has to be zayitnu, the coin, exactly a machzah shekel. In Chulin sagt Teisvis, as Moshe's Tmiya is given in the Nesina from Gavre, Chulin Teisvis is addressing the other aspect of the Machzah Shekel. The fact that the Gavre is giving a Machzah Shekel, he's giving a Kapara, he has to give it in one time because this is Kapara. How could a coin become a kofer nafshay, an atonement for his neshama, for his nefesh, if it's not a carbon? So then what's the answer? According to the Tisa in Menachos, that Moshe's question, Moshe had no idea what to give, and the Matbeya Shel Eish showed Moshe Rabbeinu that Zayitnu, it has to be a Matbeya Machzah Shekel. We now understand what was Moshe's trouble. What would Moshe not have understood? And we understand how the Matbeya Shel Eish answers it, because Eish is not weighed or measured quantitatively, and therefore, when Hashem wants to tell him that it has to be a Zayitnu, he shows him a Matbeya Shel Eish. But according to the Tisa in Menachos, in Chulin, that the question of Moshe Rabbeinu was, how could this be a koifer nafshay if it's not a carbon? How does the Matbeya Shel Eish answer it? And for that we have to go to Siv Zayin. Lay them, as a Tvia von Moshe Kvir, so Tisa in Chulin is given der Farbe, was noch nicht gewusst, as Machzah Shekel is a carbon. So according to this, Moshe's question was that he did not know that the Machzah Shekel is a carbon, and therefore he was wondering, how could this be koifer nafshay if it's not a carbon? Kumtoi says, this, therefore we must conclude that when the Eibishter showed him the coin of fire, is given nit nur zum idea sein dem geder a mitzvah in chefze for Machzah Shekel. So therefore, when the Eibishter showed Moshe the coin, it wasn't just to teach him the parameters of the mitzvah, of the chefze, the object of the mitzvah, that it has to be given as a coin of Machzah Shekel, nor eich als hasbara, in the Nesina from Gavra als a kapara carbon. It also has to explain to us, the Matbeya Shel Eish has to answer Moshe's question. It has to explain to us, how is the Machzah Shekel a carbon for the Gavra, for the person, the beer bosom. In kapara zijn dat twee inyan. In kapara, there are two details. And now, this is somewhat consistent with the two details we had before in kapara. Before we said that one aspect of kapara is that it leads, because we're buying karbanas sibur with it. The other aspect of the kapara is that it's in b'fnei atzmai. It's its own thing, that it's like a carbon. So we're going to see those two ideas reflect here as well. In kapara aleph kapara durch karbanas. One way that you could do kapara is through karbanas. Lechaper al nafshei seichem. And beis koifer nafshei. Now this is not referring to the actual Machzah Shekel that is through the karbanas. Saying, generally speaking, when we say a kapara, there's two ways for a person to find kapara. One is by giving a carbon, and one is to do something that's a koifer nafshei, that is something that is deeper for the person's nefesh. Kapara al der, and he's going to explain the difference. Kapara al der karbanas meint wie der Teich from kapara, Vergebung. Kapara through karbanas means to forgive, to be forgiven, atoned. As es wird vergeben und herabgenommen der Tumas Achet. That he's forgiven, and therefore the defilement, the contamination that came from the chet, from the sin, is removed. However, koifer nafshay is nit kein inyan von herabnehmen dem chet. Koifer nafshay is not just about removing the stain of the sin. Nor koifer oislesung von nefesh. Koifer means to redeem the soul. Das heißt, der Mit wird aufgetan, als der Nefesh wird verbitten. This replaces the soul, or transforms the soul. And therefore, he becomes redeemed because he's a new person. Kapara is still the same person, but he was cleansed. The dirt was removed. Koifer nafshay means he becomes a new person. Was die zwei inyanim, which, and again we're going a little bit off the topic here, but was die zwei inyanim seine becholos, die zwei sugim, was man gefindt bei der Tara von Tumim in Pashtos, which these two ideas we find with regards to any kind of Tara of any Tumim. Aleph, there's tefillah b'mayim, nemt up the Tumim. Number one, when you immerse something, it becomes tummy, you dip it in water, you immerse it in water, it removes the tumah. Beis, we find tefillah b'eish. Something is immersed in fire. The Gemara sagt, is iket tefillusa benura. The Gemara in Sanhedrin asks over there, is it possible to dip something in fire? And the Gemara says, the main tefillah is in fire. is techana. But when you dip something in fire, when you immerse it, when you toivel it in fire, its purpose is not to remove the tumah. But it's mimicking the impact of fire literally. Which when you take a vessel and you put it into the kiln, it comes like a new vessel. And that's why a klicheres, for example, that has to be broken, you can't demetire it, but you could put it back into the kiln and remake it as a keli, and it becomes tameh, it becomes tar. So when you do tevila be'esh, you are not just removing the dirt, you're creating a new entity. Und das ist der Chilek zwischen der Kapara von Karbonis und Kefer Nafshei. And this is the difference between Karbonis, generally speaking, and the Kefer Nafshei that is accomplished through Machzah Shekel. The Karbonis are Bechlal, the Kapara of Shgogus. The Karbonis, generally speaking, could forgive, could atone for Averis that were done not deliberately. Even if it will atone for a deliberate a sin, it will not atone for those sins for which a person would be chayiv, kares, or Mrs. Bezdin. In the sin for machzah shekel, however, but when a person gives machzah shekel, it goes much further than karbanis. Is in yonal derech mises glen zum ersten mal zum mechaper sein of chete egel. Just like the first time, the machzah shekel was to atone for the sin of the golden calf. Which actually affects the very life of the person, Sachiyuv Misa, because it is a death penalty. So too, whenever you give a Machzah Shekel, you reach deep to your very life. And therefore it has to be the redemption of the soul, as a That it should become a new entity. And this idea that the Machzah Shekel is not just cleansing the person, but is transforming the person, this was also shown to Moshe through the fiery coin. As the kapara of Machzah Shekel is techana azevi tefillah be'esh, that the Machzah Shekel is the atonement through the atonement of the Machzah Shekel is like the immersion in fire, as is pale as Verta Metzias Chadasha. It affects that the person becomes a new person, a new entity. And this is in the Tisa in Chulin, where Tisa says that Moshe was wondering how could it be Kaifer Nafshay. This is the answer to Moshe's question. We're talking about something that is reaching a whole new level of the person. It's transforming the person, and therefore the person could be forgiven, could be atoned for, because it's redeeming his soul. And now, as he says in the second half of Ara 68, he didn't yet explain how the Machzah Shekel is how is it fire, and how does it create this koifer nafshay. So we understand that somehow the Moshe's question is answered, that because it's a koifer nafshay, it's a redemption of the soul, and therefore it could work to atone for the person's neshama, person's nefesh. We still have to, and later and deeper into the sikha, we are going to address that. But I'm just acknowledging that question wasn't answered yet. The nekuda was addressed, but we still have to go deeper into it. And that's what we're going to do now. In order to understand this nekuda, the connection of Eish and Kapara, we have to understand another aspect within what the Eibusher showed Moshe Rabbeinu. We're going to focus now on the fact that even though the Eibusher showed him Matbeah Shel Eish, it was Mishkola Machzah Shekel. It weighed a half a shekel, which is a miracle within a miracle. On the one hand, we just explained at length that Eish doesn't have weight. Eish is not measured by its weight. Yet the Eibusher showed him Matbeya Shalish, which is miracle number 1, and within that the Matbeya actually weighed a half a shekel. And we're going to try to decipher the message of the fusion of, on the one hand, it being a Matbeya Shel Eish, and on the other hand, having a mishkal, having a weight. Das was der Rebbe hat bewiesen, Matbeya Shel Eish ist gewinnt Gewicht nicht zum Weisen, und in der Sinne von Machzah Shekel. Ist nicht an Indien von Shavi Mishkal, nor Zayit Nuknal Barucha, even though that the fact that the Rebbe showed Moshe Matbeya Shel Eish was for the purpose of showing Moshe Rabbeinu that Machzah Shekel is not about weight or value, but it has to be an actual half shekel coin, as was explained at length in the past. Rashi nevertheless tells us that the coin of fire had the weight of a machzah shekel. And to quote Rashi, Her olek min matbeya shel eish u mishkal machzah shekel. From the fact that David did a miracle within a miracle. Not only was a coin of fire, but the coin of fire that had weight is muchach as in der prat von Mishkal der Rebbe mechad is given an by Moshe. It's, we must say that also this detail of the weight, Moshe, the Rebbe was introducing something to Moshe, was wenn nit had ole matbeya shleishu Mishkal ultimate das aspect nit gewusst. If not for the fact that the Rebbe showed Moshe a coin of fire that actually had weight, there was another thing that Moshe would not have known. In andere Wörter, in the Sinne von Machzah Shekel is negea nit nur der etzem matbeya shleish. Der Euchas der Machzah Shekel der sein bedugmet zu matbeya shleish was hat a mishkal. In other words, the Machzah Shekel is not only that it doesn't have to be a coin of fire, it has to be a coin of fire that has weight. So what's the connection? What's the connection and what is the significance? What is the message to Moshe Rabbeinu in the fact that the coin has to have weight? And we're going to have to step another step back before we get back in. So let's just stop for a moment to make sure that we understand what we're holding. We introduced the fact that there's 2 details to Machzah Shekel. Number 1, it has to be given in one shot because it's a kapara and like a carbon, and therefore it has to be done in one time. And it also has to be given in one coin. The fact that it has to be given in one coin, we learned from Zayitnu. The fact that it has to be, the fact that it's a kapara, excuse me, and therefore has to be given in one time is learned from the Nosnu Ish Koifer Nafshay, which basically means that the 2 psukim, the Nosnu Ish Koifer Nafshay is talking about the gavra, that the person cannot give it lachatzah and cannot give it in installments, and Zayitnu is talking about the chefza, the object of the coin, that it has to be a machzis hashekel. That's why the Rambam uses the 2 expressions, bepamachas, kulek achas, ubepamachas, because he's referring to these 2 details. It has to be given in one time and in one coin. The fact that it says it has to be done in one time because it's a kapara, Tisa and Chulon addresses that and says that Moshe wondered, how could it be a kapara? The fact that it says zayitnu, that it has to be given in exactly machzah shekel, Tisa says Moshe would never have known that, if not for the fact that it was a matbeya shleish. So the fact that there was a matbeya shleish told Moshe Rabbeinu that it has to be given. It's not about the weight. It's not about It's not about the weight. It's not about the value. It's about the coin. It has to be a machzah shekel coin. And from the fact that to the Tisa and Chulin that Moshe was bothered by Kofer Nafshay, the Eibishter answered that even though it's not a carbon like a regular carbon, but it has the ability to immerse the person in fire and redeem his soul and make him into a new entity. But we have to understand what that means. What does it mean that through the matbeya shleish a person becomes a new person? So in order to understand this, we introduced the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu, that the Eibishter showed Moshe Rabbeinu the eish, but it also had a mishkal. It also had weight, which is a very tangible physical element within a coin of fire, which is totally spiritual. And now we're going to introduce one more detail that'll help us bring it together. Wenn man das verstehen, so now we have to understand the connection, this Eish and Mishkal fusion. We have to understand what message was this to Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's how we'll understand how it could be Kaifer Nafshe. Wenn wir das verstehen, beachten, was Tisa Moshe ma yuchal adam litten Kaifer Nafshe, wie gebracht wieder von Teisves. So we're going to introduce this idea that this Moshe's question, what could a person give that would atone for his soul? Und der Pharao, der Eibishter, which because of that question, Hashem showed Moshe Rabbeinu a coin of fire, is Mekoide in Medrash. This idea, its source is in the Medrash. Und dort is Mevur, Ados, V'nosnu Kefer Nafshe, this thing that Eibishter said, Kefer Nafshe, and Moshe wondered, how can you give Kefer Nafshe? Is given eine von die drei Sachen. It's one of three things. Sheshama Moshe pi agvura, that Moshe heard from Hashem, v'nivhal, v'nirta la'acherav, and he was stunned. He was shocked, and he retreated backwards. And the Medrash says, when the Eibishter commanded Moshe Rabbeinu about the karbanis, Amar Moshe v'yuchal aspik le-karbanis. Who can give enough karbanis to the Eibishter? If we bring all of the animals in the field, it won't be enough for the Eibishter. So Hashem said, I'm not asking on my terms. I'm asking on their terms. You don't have to give what's enough for me. You have to give what's good for you. What works for you. When the Eibishter said to Moshe, make for me a mikdash, a sanctuary, and I will dwell there. Moshe said, who can make a mikdash for the Eibishter should dwell in it? The greatest heavens, the highest heavens cannot contain Hashem. So Moshe Rabbeinu answered, I'm not asking you to fit me on my level, on my terms. I'm asking you to do something on your terms. Is it move on? So now we have a question on this third thing. Since Moshe already knew this idea that the Eibishter is only demanding things from the Yidden that are on their level, why was he so shocked? And why was he so confused by the words What's the question? You'll give him atbeya, machzah shekel, this will atone for your soul. All the money in the world is not going to buy off the Eibishter, but the Eibishter doesn't want all the money in the world. The Eibishter wants something that's coming from us. And we can't answer as the chiddush utmiya from Moshe is given their farbal. Das is kefer nafshe v'chet egel. That Moshe Rabbeinu's question was specifically because here we were asking to be forgiven for the Chet Egel, the Metzah Metzias canal, which affects the very definition of the person. It's a chiyuv misa, like we said before in the Sikha. But we already find that the Eibishter told Moshe that it's possible to be forgiven for this. Because in the Yimei HaMiluim, the Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu to take a cow, and offer it as a carbon to atone for the sin of the golden calf, which was from the family of the poor. So the problem that Moshe has here is not the fact that it's a chet egel. So what was Moshe's problem? Why was Moshe so shocked? How are you going to give a kaifer nafshay if Moshe already knows that the Eibishter is only mevakes lifi koichan of the Yidden, is only asking on the for something that is on the terms of the Yidden? So the is the beer in them. So the explanation is as follows. But the Mishkan is verstandig as das was Yidden am getan is b'nafikechen. By the building of the Mishkan, it's understood that what the Yidden did was on their level. But as their status in them is given mit divus libam, because their participation was with the generosity of their heart, as the pasuk says, "Kol nadiv libay, kol isha sheyedvenu libay." Every person whose heart will be generous. Kol nadiv libay yaviyah. Everyone every benevolent heart should bring it. So too by the par, the cow that was brought in the Yimei HaMiluim as an atonement for the Chet Egel, also it was on their level. Well, by carbon is a din as Yaakov let's say, because the din by a carbon is that it has to be done willingly by the person. Und das, as es darf sein, der Ratzna menadish v'shal bal hakarbon. And the fact that the donor has to be willing to give it, it does madgish, as es is lefi keichan. In dem keichan shal Yisrael, the Yid who's bringing it, who's doing it, is involved in it. He wants to do it, and therefore this is on his terms. But here's Moshe's problem. By machzah shekel, it was a must. It wasn't optional. It wasn't just for the generous of the heart. Every single Yid had to do machzah shekel. See whether he wants to or not. In addition to that, the din is that we coerce the person to give. And someone who doesn't give, we exact it from him. We force him to give it even with a mashkin. We take a collateral against his will. We might even take his garment, which means that as much as he goes kicking and screaming he doesn't want to give, we will force him to give it. And we're going to ask in a question, so Moshe's question is going to be, if you're forcing him to give it, then what does it mean it's on his terms? His terms are to not give it. How can you atone for something? How can you use something to atone for yourself if you're against giving it in the first place? And we'll get to that question in a minute. We just have to go through the brackets here. Now, is that the din from kaifenese. Even though also by karbonis there's a din that we coerce the person. Is as abed in a nefim from kaifenese Hashem ereitzani. By karbonis the din is that we give it. We force him until he says reitzani, until he says I'm willing. So even though on the external level it is a forced saying, I want, nevertheless it's still true. Because in the depth of his soul, every Yid wants to fulfill the Rasna of Hashem, like the Rambam says in Hilchas Gittin, that really a Yid wants to do the mitzvahs, and he wants to stay away from Avedas, but his Yitzhak Takveh, his Yitzhak is too strong for him. But it's not who he is. Really who he is a person who wants to do mitzvahs. So therefore, by karbanis, we say, we coerce the person until he says, I'm willing, and that I'm willing is reflective of the depth of his soul, which is willing. We don't find that by machzah shekel the Yid has to say reitzani, das heißt, in seine Sinne muss nicht sein reitzani, we don't need his will. Since the actual giving is just a very external action of the hand, and we do not see the soul of the Yid at all in the giving because he doesn't want to give it. He doesn't even say reitzani after being pressured to do so. Now comes Moshe's question: how could this atone for his soul? There's none of his effort in it. There's none of his terms on it. He's not involved in this. That was Moshe's question. Even after telling Moshe Rabbeinu, so I understand when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash, when it comes to karbonis, person, there's a ratzon of the person. The ratzon means there's a koyach of the person. There, the person's involved, and therefore it generates what it has to generate. But when it comes to machzah shekel, there's no ratzon. If there's no ratzon, there's no koyach. And therefore Moshe, the Eibishter showed Moshe that weighed a half a shekel. And this is a very important detail. Where did the coin come from? It came from under the holy throne, the kisei hakavod of the Eibishter, and that will answer Moshe's question that even a person who doesn't want to give machzah shekel could still find kaifer nafshay in the giving of the machzah shekel. As we will continue to explain. Yud. So let's keep on going here, because we're on a roll now. We asked the question, how does the Matbeah Shel Eish answer Moshe's question of how do you do Keifer Nafshay? And to get there, we introduced the fact that the Eibishter gave an Eish, a Matbeah Shel Eish with a mishkala with weight of a half a shekel. And we asked, how do those two things go together? We now explained that Moshe was wondering by the machzas hashekel, since there's no ratzon of the person, there's no koyach of the person, how does that create koyfer nafshay? How can you say that it's lefi koychon if there's no machzas, if there's no koychon, if there's no will and therefore involvement of the person? And we explained that in the Matbeah Shalesh that comes from under the Kisei HaKavod, we're going to get the answer to that question. Yud, they're tampering me of them. The deeper reason was a machzah shekel that the machzah shekel, there's no din that you have to pressure the person until he says, I want. Adin carbon, especially according to what we said earlier, that the machzah shekel is like a carbon, and by a carbon we do say, so why by machzah shekel do we not do that? Because the machzah shekel is coming to atone for the chet ha'egel, which the chet ha'egel affected the very essence of the yid. It tore them away also on the level of the depth of their soul. It doesn't help. In the previous column, we said that what happens is, since in the depth of his soul he wants to do the mitzvah, so when you pressure him to say Reitzani, it's actually reflective of what he wants in the depth of his soul. But a yid that's coming from a place of Chet HaEgel, which killed the depth of the soul, even on the level of the depth of the soul, he doesn't want, or at least if he wants, it can't come out in the open. So therefore, there's no din kayfen, it won't help. Saying Reitzani is not going to help, because he's in a place where the Pnimius and Neshama is dead. I mean, Kaviyachal. And therefore the Eibishter showed Moshe Rabbeinu a coin of fire, which the Eibishter removed from the Kisei HaKavod, mitzad Pnimius HaNeshama, to tell Moshe that, well, you're talking about the depth of the soul. Vizi is shaykh zum guf, which, as it is still connected to the guf. Then the giving of the machzah shekel cannot come from the input of the yid. Das can ober yezayn mitzat etzem haneshama. Was is echer legamri fun giluyim. But when it comes to the etzem haneshama, which is higher than pnimius haneshama, the pnimius haneshama is still related to the guf. But the etzem haneshama is removed from the guf. It's totally removed from the guf. It's beyond the giluyim, the expressions of the neshama. Well, aspiyas neshama is that etzem von alle koiches, euch von sein atzir chitzonis. The etzem neshama, because it is so deep at the core and the very essence of the soul, therefore it is the core of every aspect of the neshama, even the very external, practical expressions of the neshama. And therefore, the etzem neshama, on the one hand, it's removed. But on the other hand, it can impact every level of the neshama, even the lowest levels of the neshama. So 2 points he made over here. Number one, that the etzem neshama is able to reach kaifer nafshay, is able, I'll rephrase that. The etzem neshama is able to do something. Mitzat koichon shel Yisrael, the input of a yid is there when the etzem neshama gets involved, because the etzem neshama, although it's removed from the sins and everything, so therefore it's not affected by the person saying that he doesn't want to give, but at the same time, it's the etzem of every part of the neshama, and therefore the etzem could impact even the most external, lowest level of the neshama. And das meint Herr Le'akadosh Baruch Hu. That's when Hashem showed it to him. The Eibishter hat megala given b'derech b'lamayla l'mato. The Eibishter revealed from above that the coin of fire comes from under the Eibishter's Kisei HaKavod. The bechinas eish shebeneshama. It comes from the fire of the neshama. Etzem neshama, which is the essence of the soul, the core of the soul. Vizi is mushus l'mayla v'tachas kisei kavod, because also the neshama comes from tachas kisei hakavod. V'di Chazal zagen, and neshama is gzurim tachas kisei kavod. The Chazal tell us in the Zohar that the neshama comes from under the kisei hakavod. So when Moshe Rabbeinu is shown the matbeah shel eish, the Eibishter is saying, look, even if a person says, I don't want to give it, which means he's so far removed that there's no Keichen Shal Yisrael. But if you reach Mitachas Kisei HaKavod, if you reach to the Esem and Neshama, which is coming from under the Kisei HaKavod, and the level of Esem and Neshama, you are able to accomplish that when he gives it, it should come mitzad koichai, even while he's kicking and screaming, saying, I don't want to give it. Now we understand the nes b'toich nes. Now we understand the nes b'toich nes, why on the one hand there was a matbeah shaleish, but on the other hand, it was also it had mishkala, it had weight. As the etzem and neshama nem durch die neshama mit ihrer alle keches dalemata bis in mishkal. Moshe Rabbeinu is being shown by the Eibishter, and the Eibishter is revealing that the etzem and neshama is so impactful to the neshama that it even affects the weight. It even affects the most external, tangible, physical, if such a thing is possible, element of the neshama. Das heißt, dass die Matbeah Shaleish Etzem an Neshama is nicht die besondere Sache von der Kirche, so sein da in der Sinne Gashmis. The Matbeah Shaleish, which means the Etzem an Neshama, is not something separate from the faculties that are being used in the physical giving. No, the Matbeah Shaleish Gufa is Mishkala Machza Shekel. The Matbeah Shaleish, the coin of fire, has a weight. It weighs a half a shekel. Ukinala, the Etzem Neshama is the Etzem Neshama, like we said before. The Etzem Neshama is actually the core of all the Keiches, even the Gashmias. Underfar, let's do one more paragraph and then we'll summarize. Afilu when the Nisina von Aiden is on the Ramide von Reitzani, even when the Yid is saying, it doesn't say I want to give, says in a nefer from Mishkal, it's weighing upon him, and the Nisina Gashmis Bechumris on Rasim L'chayis, he's giving something without any passion or desire. Says Mishkal, its weight as vekt and schlept lamata, it weighs him down. Umedarfa ben tirchon afilu kfir, and you have to work hard, and sometimes even coercion. To give it is aber der emes la mite. Und das ist der Ufte of Machza Shekel, and this is the accomplishment of Machza Shekel, that the very truth, as by Eden is Eichet Dina Sinne gebunden mit Eisher ben Neshama, that when the Yid gives it, even that giving, the giving that he's kicking and screaming and saying, I don't want to do this, nevertheless, it still originates from the fire of the Neshama, as the Amitis Upnimius from Zayin Keach HaAsiyah. V'Hanesina is the Izgalos from Tachas Kisei Kvede V'Smatbeah Shalish Etzem Nishmasei. That when the person gives it, the very truth, the definition of what he's doing is the revelation of the fire of the neshama, the fiery coin that is coming from under Kisei HaKavod. So in other words, what the Eibishter was telling Moshe Rabbeinu is like this. The Eibishter telling Moshe Rabbeinu is that even a Yid, Moshe said, how can you do kofer nafshay? You need to have koichan. You need to have a Yid has to be there. He has to be involved. He has to do something. So the Eibishter says, look at this matbeah shalish. Don't look at what the Yid is saying, I don't want to give it. Look at the etzem neshama. Look at the fire of the neshama, where the neshama comes from. On that level, the Eibishter reveals that level has weight. That level has the ability to impact even the physical gifts. So when the Yid is giving something, even though he doesn't want to give it, it's still considered koichan shel Yisrael, and therefore it could be kofer nafshay. And if you notice, there was a double entendre here to the word mishkala. That on the one hand, mishkala was the gashmias of the person, the koyach ha'asiyah, and on the other hand, even when it's in the oifen of mishkal, when it's weighing on him, he doesn't want to give it, it's still a gift. So we've answered the why the Eibishter made a nes b'teichnes and gave the eish, showed the matbeah shel eish with mishkala machzis hashekel, because it wants to show he wanted to show Moshe Rabbeinu that the etzem neshama is one with the external expressions of the neshama, and therefore everything that the person does is be'etzem koichan shel Yisrael and could accomplish kofer nafshay. We now understand how a machzah shekel could do a kofer nafshay because it's coming from the etzem neshama. Al pi kol anal, and based on this is verstandig die shayches zwischen die zwei inyanim anal in machzah shekel. Now, if you remember, we started at the beginning of the sikha that there was two inyanim in machzah shekel. There was zayitnu, which was the chefza, the matbeah shel eish, the matbeah of machzah shekel, and there was the kofer nafshay, the fact that it is a kapora. Now we're going to bring those two things together. The din v'nosnu ish kefer nafshay, the din in nesina, this is kefer nafshay, a carbon, the fact that it's a carbon, und zeh yitnu the din mechefze, das is nit a geder v'shavius v'erech, nor a metzius, nor a matbeya machza shekel kesef. The fact that it's a din in the object, that it has to be not something of weight. It's not about how much it weighs, even though it has to weigh. But I'm saying the parameter of the mitzvah is not that it should be an accumulation of things that weigh a certain amount, but it has to be an actual coin. But both of these details, the fact that it's a kapara and the fact that it has to be a matbeya itself, both express the same detail, the same essence. As the nesina from machzah shekel is from eish, the etzem and neshama tachas kisekvede, that the giving of the machzah shekel is coming from the fire and essence and core of the neshama. And he's going to say like this: because it's kaifer nafshay, meaning to say it's coming from etzem and neshama. Therefore, zeyitnu, it can't be divided. Because the etzem and neshama is l'mayla mitzchalkus, the etzem and neshama is beyond division. So he's connecting kaifer nafshay with zeyitnu. Because it's kaifer nafshay, because you're reaching the yeshiv and neshama, the etzem and neshama, therefore you can't give it in a bunch of different coins. Because as l'mayla mitzchalkus, it's zeyitnu, it has to be one item above and beyond division. Since the essence, the core of the neshama is beyond being divided or revealed or expressed or into different expressions, is move on as that therefore also the actual gift has to be similar to the etzem neshama. The bas achas, it has to be given in one time on his chalkus, without dividing it. Und der shear von der matbeya is nit a kamus diker, and the amount is not one of quantity. Was metzich and shavius and mishka, which is being measured in weight or value. And it is a one of quality and one of the core of the neshama. My high time is the kapara from machzah shekel and eifin from eish. And this is why the atonement could be an eifin of eish. This is what we left a little bit open-ended in the end of Ois, by order 68, in the end of Oizayin. How taka does the eish work? It says was machti with the mention in the Metzias Chadasha, because it's transforming the person into a new entity. Because since you're revealing the etzem and neshama here, all of his keiches become changed to the point that he could become a brand new person. So all of these details have now been woven together into this phenomenal idea. An idea that Moshe Rabbeinu wondered, how can a person receive kaifer nafshay from machzah shekel? It's a coin. Especially a coin that a person is being forced to give. He has no passion there, he has no desire there, he has no interest there. It's being forced upon him. And the Eibishter tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you forgot one detail. You forgot the fact that a Yid has an etzem haneshama. Not only a pnimius haneshama, which is affected somewhat by the guf, he has an etzem haneshama. And on the level of etzem haneshama, the Yid is perfect. And when a Yid gives a machzah shekel while kicking and screaming, because it's coming from the etzem haneshama, it's considered keichet shel Yisrael. And therefore, it's kaifer nafshay. And therefore, it could forgive him for his chatoim, because even a chet where his etzem etzias is affected, he's dead inside, like after chet egel, because he's getting a new mitzias. He's going back to his etzem neshama, which is reproducing new koiches, and therefore he becomes a new person. And this new person is not affected by what happened before. He becomes a new person, and his soul is redeemed. Yisud Beis and Yud Gimel are going to be the Hira B'Poel, but in order to get to the Hira, he wants to make one more Nakuda. But however, this idea that Eibishter showed Moshe Rabbeinu and Matveya Shalish is overgekommen erst nach dem. It happened erst nach dem Moshe v'nifal v'nirta lachayda. It was only after Moshe was stunned and shocked and retreated backwards. Davke ven bechines Moshe chachma di kedusha vet nivel. Only after Moshe, which is chachma di kedusha, becomes shocked. Not being able to comprehend, to grasp how an external physical action can actually create an atonement. This awakens Hashem that He should show, reveal, and draw down from above the darga for neshama and neshama, the level of the fire of the neshama. It should come down into actual physical weight. Just says the esam and neshama zok tzechareis begoli in the keches and neshama. Bizn ma'isa mitzvah v'na'idin, meaning to tell me that where does the esam and neshama reveal itself? In the mitzvah, in the action of the mitzvah of a yid. After Moshe comes and says, I don't get it. Now Hashem says, if you're holding at that level of bittul, then I could help you. Now I could reveal the Etzem and Neshama and show you that the Etzem and Neshama is expressed specifically in the person's mitzvahs. And this is the lesson in the Aveda every Yid. It happened that a person doesn't feel any geschmack, any enjoyment in learning Torah doing mitzvahs. It becomes something that he does mechanically, like a robot. Neshama soulless. It becomes a yoke and a pressure. He has to force himself to fulfill the Eibishter's Ratzon. And even the forcing is not like a servant that submits himself to his master. He's doing it because he has no choice. That when he will think about it, and think about it on a personal level. And his chachma, his Moshe, will get shaken up. Therefore, from the fact that he doesn't have a feeling and a passion in serving Hashem. Unin Mekayim and the Mibish's Ratzon and fulfilling Hashem's Ratzon. Das Guf is made of the meaning from the Reim at Beish. This awakens the fiery coin. As the Kazbaruch Hu is that Hashem should help him. The Eibishter is Mamshech and Bavais B'chinas Moshe Shemenavshay Dem Eishem Menavshay. The Eibishter shows his Moshe. He shows him the fire Etzem and Neshama. When there's Nimshach and Mishkala and it gets brought down in the weight in Alakeches and Nefesh B'Zemaisa and Peil and Neif and Gali. If you think about it and you're shaken up by it, Eibishter, how is it that I feel no passion, I feel no excitement when it comes to mitzvahs? That shock, that feeling bad will awaken in the Eibishter and reveal to you your Etzem and Nefesh, which will affect your Ma'aser Peil and ultimately change you to the point that you'll get your passion back. Yud Gimel le'idach, Hatman von dem die Hira, and as well, we have a Hira and the other way as well. Shas is da'id was leisata firter sich nit azevi as darf sich firten ben Avram Yitzchak v'Yankov. If he has a Yid who temporarily is not conducting himself as a child of Avram Yitzchak v'Yankov should conduct themselves. And every Yid has the obligation to bring him closer to Torah mitzvahs. There are those that claim what meaning is there to telling this Yid you have to put tefillin on now, or to say Krishma now. He's not on that level at all. Versteht nicht, was das meint. Und hat kein nicht das zu tun. He doesn't understand it and has no desire to do it. Und was für ist es zu machriach sein mit anderen tefillin? What purpose is there to force him to put on tefillin? Wird es tun, nor der Farbe as an edler Mensch. He's only going to do it because he's a refined person, he's a well-mannered person, and he doesn't want to say no. But the doing the mitzvah means nothing to him. They say that they argue the order has to be different. First you have to clarify to him, step by step, day by day. Then you have to explain it to him according to Seichel. Then he'll do it on his own. So the people argue, what are you going to force the guy to do it for? Explain it to him. Give him the background and teach him. And then he'll do it on his own. And this is the Eirav Machzah Shekel. So Yid is Mekayim mitzvah. Afilu not in a nefel from Mishkala. When a Yid does a mitzvah, even as a weight, without desire, without enjoyment. Even if he is coerced. The Eibishter shows that this is a coin of fire. This is really truly coming from the fire, from the essence of his soul, from the core of his soul. And therefore this is truly his desire, this is truly his will. his enjoyment. Durch dem, was wird Peul und auf zweiten Mekayim sein, die Mitzvah, afilun aber der Kfir. But and on the contrary, when you will accomplish on this person to fulfill this mitzvah, even if it's just forced, since in truth this is coming from the fire of the soul, this will accomplish that it will ultimately come down into the weight to the point that this will become his true desire, his true enjoyment. But the Mekayim and the mitzvah with the ganzen brenner fire from the neshama. Ultimately, he is going to fulfill this mitzvah with the entire passion and fire of the soul. And this will actually hasten the bringing of the karbanos which were purchased with the machzas shekel in the Beis Hamikdash Shlishi, in the third Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim and HaKodesh, was be'esh at osid of Nesa, which will be built with fire. It will be made out of a wall of fire. That if we follow this Heirah, then we will bring the Beis Hamikdash. May it be speedily in our days.